Does the Grand Canyon prove that Noah's flood ever took place? Yeah, of course not. That's just ridiculous. But as I take a look at a requested apologist, I think we're going to see that being ridiculous isn't frowned upon among the religious. Because if it was, apologetics simply couldn't happen. So, off we go. People asked me to take a look at Matt Powell, so here we go with that. And what better place to start than with his absurd misunderstanding of geology? Yes, today we're going to take a look at Noah's flood and why it's so utterly ridiculous if you have any understanding of reality, which clearly Matt doesn't, as if that's any surprise. So he gets absolutely everything completely wrong. And I trust no one is really going to be shocked by that, right? So let's go take a gander.
Obviously, the Grand Canyon has layers of sedimentary rock all the way through.
Wow, that's just a sudden video there, isn't it? No introduction, nothing to indicate what the hell he's talking about. He just goes for it. Okay, whatever, I don't really care, but it's just kind of interesting to me. So, as a lot of people might know, the first thing I really ever delved into when I left Christianity or was on my way out was Noah's flood. And that's why I picked this video to go through first, because it's one thing I don't think I've really talked about as much as I probably ought to. Noah's flood is total nonsense. It is absolutely indefensible in any intellectual way. But one thing that the religious do, consistently if you notice, is they simply cherry pick ideas to look at while ignoring all the things right next door because it totally destroys their narrative. And that's what I suspect is going to go on here today. And that's what I'm going to completely trounce, whether Matt Powell likes it or not. The second you start trying to compare science and theology, everything inherently goes sideways. So let's see how Matt Powell handles it. I predict badly.
Now, sedimentary rock is dried out mud. So just by the definition of the Grand Canyon being sedimentary rock, just the fact that it says that the evolutionists will say it's sedimentary rock, they're admitting that it's dried out mud, which could only be laid out by a flood.
No, it can't. I mean, think about it. He defines the sedimentary layers as dried out mud, which isn't quite accurate, but hey, we'll just go with it. Now, in the Grand Canyon, there are about 40 major layers, ranging in age from about 200 million years to nearly 2 billion years. Now, going by his definition of dried out mud, exactly how do these 40-ish layers dry out between layers exactly in the middle of a singular flood? How does that work exactly? Because whether he likes it or not, it just doesn't. And this is why apologists are so singularly terrible about pretty much everything. See, they have a goal in mind before they ever get started. Matt has to defend his silly flood story in the Bible because he thinks the Bible means something worthwhile, even though he's completely wrong. He has to figure out a way to defend the flood, which is absolutely indefensible. So he says things that make absolutely no sense if you just take a few steps back and just look at what's being said. But he can't do that, and he doesn't even try, because his goal is defending mythology, not finding truth. We don't have that problem, so I don't think he's going to do very well. But let's see.
So that's what sedimentary rock even means. So by definition, the Grand Canyon was caused by a flood, just by the own definition that it has.
No. In fact, that's about the last thing that you would ever expect to see in a chaotic flood. The Grand Canyon was caused by the influx of warm, shallow seas over many, many millions of years of time. What we would expect to see in the Grand Canyon is absolutely not what we see at the site of known large-scale flooding. You don't get the nice, flat, consistent stratification that we see in the Grand Canyon. If it had all been the results of a single chaotic flood event, and keep in mind that is how it's described in the Bible, then you would have a jumble of different strata that look absolutely nothing like the Grand Canyon that we see today. So, as is no surprise, Matt is just wrong. But what else is new?
And then number 2, in between the layers, we don't see any animal holes, for example.
Now, I'm not exactly sure what he means by animal holes, but the one thing that we do see at the Grand Canyon are fossils by the ton. Everything from Precambrian microfossils and algal mats all the way to marine fossils such as brachiopods and sponges, and even early dragonflies, scorpions, and early reptiles. What we don't see there, and what we shouldn't expect to see there, are dinosaurs. The Grand Canyon was formed long before the age of dinosaurs, and thus they simply do not appear. And that cannot be explained by a single large catastrophic flood event. In fact, if you think about it, flood geology is a complete disaster. There is no way that any of the structures we see in nature could possibly have been formed by a single flood event. It simply doesn't work that way, but as I keep saying, the religious just don't care. They are on a mission from God, and they're not going to let anything get in the way. Anything like pesky facts, geological evidence, or critical thinking. Anything like that. Who cares about any of that, right? They've got blind faith to defend.
So, if I was to step outside right now, I would see animal holes occasionally by a mole or by a snake or by a critter that burrows down into the earth. Groundhog, for example. Well, in between the layers of the Grand Canyon, we don't see any animal holes between the layers.
And those things get filled in all the time. As silt gets washed in, holes like that get filled. It's why those holes don't exist in your backyard for all eternity. They just go away, usually in a very short period of time. Of course, people like Powell, they aren't thinking in geologic timescales because they're convinced, stupidly, that the whole planet is less than 10,000 years old. But seriously, think, McFly. Think. It really isn't that hard. Except maybe for the religious.
Now, if these layers collected over millions of years and were slow to form, we would expect to find animal holes in the layers where animals dug inside of those, but we don't find them.
Because you're just grasping at straws and you don't understand basic geology. But, of course, he's just wrong here, as he's wrong about most things. We do find those things, but because the Grand Canyon was formed so long ago, before the evolution of groundhogs or whatever he's talking about, what we do see there are things like worm burrows and insect nests that exist between the sedimentary layers. I mean, here's some worm burrows found at the Bright Angel Shale, which is located at the lower elevations in the Grand Canyon and contains fossils going back to the Cambrian Age. Now, Matt could learn about these things if he wanted to, if he wasn't so busy fapping for the Lord and trying to prove that his silly book of mythology was true, but of course, we know that's not going to happen. He's starting with a major misconception, and his errors just get compounded from there. And that's not exactly a surprise, is it?
If they were millions of years old, we would also expect to find root holes, right? Because there would be trees growing in the layers, there would be plants, but we don't find any root remains in any of the layers of strata.
Except we do. Come on, Matt, you can't really be this dumb, can you? Yeah, don't answer that. We already know. In fact, we find fossilized crinoids, or sea lilies, which had root-like structures that would hold them in place, and we do have fossilized remains of those. He's looking for a garden. The site was mostly underwater. The earliest species of tree that we know of, Cladoxylopsida, didn't grow in what is now the western United States. The oldest fossilized trees in North America, found at Gilboa Dam in mid-New York State, they only evolved at the very tail end of the Grand Canyon Formation. So, of course they weren't there. They didn't exist then. Matt is an idiot.
You know what that tells you is that all of the layers were deposited at the same time, because there was no time in between for trees to grow and animals to burrow down in.
No, what it really tells us is that you're a moron, because you clearly don't understand the site, nor geology, nor, let's be honest, much of anything else. And that's not really much of a surprise, because, as I said, people like Matt have an agenda, and it's not the truth. They have a conclusion that they have to reach because it's emotionally comforting, and they're going to cherry pick the data to try, desperately, to reach their faith-based beliefs. All of the information I've provided here, it's not that hard to come by if you just go look. But either Matt didn't look, which is very likely, or Matt found it and just ignored it because it didn't fit his agenda, which I guess is certainly possible. But in both cases, he could have known better, he should have known better before he made this video. But he didn't, because he doesn't care. If this is the best evidence that he can come up with, how pathetic is that?
I want people to know what the truth is.
No, you don't. You don't care about the truth. You only care about your emotional comfort. That's not the same thing. Because if anyone on the religious side gave a damn about the truth, it wouldn't look like they're trying to cover it up all the time. They'd actually be able to talk intelligently about the whole of the data and not cherry pick. Because this stuff has been going on since the whole creationism nonsense began. And I started chasing it down back in the day of Henry Morris and Duane Gish. And it hasn't gotten any better since then. It just hasn't.
I'm sick of people being lied to.
Because he sees everything as black and white. There's absolutely no shades of grey in between.
That's actually how science works, right? So there are laws that we establish, laws that we discover. Those laws are black and white.
No, they're not. Not in the way you're trying to assert. The physical laws that we discover are things that we discovered. They're not things that we make up. They aren't so because we say that they are. They are what seems to be defensible and demonstrable in the real world. And I don't think Matt understands that, or really much of anything else. And this seems very common among the religious, who think the reality is what we say it is, and where we're wrong, reality has to comply with our wishes, because we and our beliefs and our wishes and our dreams have to be right. We make observations about the world, and when we find things that don't fit our line of thinking, we have to change our thinking to accommodate reality. Reality doesn't have to change to fit our thinking like you people seem to think it does. It is possible that we could make discoveries tomorrow that would change pretty much everything we thought we knew about the universe. It's unlikely, but it certainly is possible. But people like Matt, they can't handle that. They want absolute, unchanging truth right this second, and that's not how the real world works. It's why they're confused so much. Science is a constant process of trial and error to get us incrementally closer to understanding the universe that we all live in. It doesn't matter if that makes you happy. Grow up and get over yourselves. Yeah, no thanks. I really have no idea why people are impressed with Matt Powell at all. He's one of those people who got suggested back when I did my low-hanging fruit videos, and I've never understood why. He's not some big-brained rational thinker. This is the kind of content that he makes, and it's dumb the second that you actually understand the subject matter, which very clearly he doesn't. And that's really why the religious are looking for gullible, uneducated, stupid people, because those are the only ones who would fall for something like this. Oh, I really want the Bible to be true, and here's someone telling me that it is, so he must be right, right? Except Matt isn't saying anything intelligent. None of them are. None of them can, because they really don't understand the concepts that they're talking about. Because they're just not interested in those concepts, are they? They're only shooting for blind faith and emotional comfort. And absolutely none of this originated with Matt Powell. You can go back, as I said, to Henry Morris, who is a trained and degreed hydrologist. But when it came to apologetics, all of that went right out the window, and he just said things that absolutely violated everything that he had learned because faith was more important to him than facts. This is incredibly common among the religious pseudo-intellectuals. Where science conflicts with their faith, lie. Who cares about science? Who cares about facts? Who cares about anything but feeling good? And this is why I don't care about degrees. I care about your adherence to the truth. You need to explain the reality that we see, not ignore the parts that you can't make fit into your narrative. And that's how religious apologetics works, if you notice. It's either dishonest or it's dumb. Take your pick. The one thing it never is credible. And for those of us who actually care about the facts, it's why the religious will always fail. They can't get there on facts alone, and so long as that's true, religion will remain nothing but a laughing stock. And I'm fine with that. Maybe more people will realize just how pathetic the religious are, and in the Western world, where people are actually getting educated, that is happening, and that's a good thing. Anything that will make this mental poison just go away is a good thing.
Bum